Okay, as we grew up, we continually learned about our nation's history, whether we learned about new laws that were put in place or acts of terror on our country, which may make you think about all the horrible things that have happened to our country. My name is Madison Ann Warshko. I was born on January 2nd, 2001, and I've lived and learned a lot in these past 18 years. In this speech, I'm going to tell you about the jumps our country has made because of terrorist acts, my past medical experiences, and my high school life experiences. Although acts of terror may harm our country, they also show us how to come together and love one another. The ideals of these groups were more than likely to break our country apart when in turn they actually brought us together, even if it may have taken a few years. On September 11th, 2001, one of the most horrific terrorist attacks occurred on American soil. This awful event happened exactly 252 days after I was born. This was a big date in history because many of us know exactly what we were doing at the time of the attack. Even though some of us may have just been learning to walk, or your parents have probably told you exactly what happened for them that day. Personally, my mom told me that she had just dropped me off at my grandmother's house for the day and was listening to the radio on her way to work when they announced that the plane had struck the first tower. She told me once she got into work that all of her fellow employees piled into the break room to watch everything that was happening on the news. I recently read an article from CBS News by Bob Schieffer, Remembering 9/11, when Americans came together. The author talks about how closely impacted he was, that he had a large amount of friends that lost very close relatives. He also shared that he'd been in the room that the plane had hit in the previous days. I love what Schieffer's saying here in this quote, how an awful day brought Americans together as they had not come together since World War II. How road rage disappeared the next day as people waved and honked. We all had gone through it all together. This awful moment in American history had in turn brought people to be less aggressive towards one another and had brought them closer. The main reason I believe people seemed more caring was because they either knew someone who was killed that day or they themselves could have been in the building when it went down. I found on CNN that there were almost 3,000 casualties that day, which is a crazy number to think about. 2001 will always be remembered for good or bad reasons alike, not only because of the attack, but for all the other diverse events that happened throughout this year, and one of those events included my birth. My birthday may have been a very happy day for my parents, but 18 months later it was a nightmare for them. And I'm not talking about the loud baby kind of nightmare. On June 26, 2002, I was a year and a half old and I had my first fever-induced seizure, which led to November 11th, 2002. I fell down the stairs in my house, and the next day I started having seizures that lasted for hours. My seizure first started, when my seizure first started, my dad and grandpa had just left a few hours prior for Chicago for a power show, and my grandma was alone with me. She noticed I was seizing and called my mom. They immediately drove me up to Hampton to Franklin General Hospital, where they sent me on to Mason City because I had not stopped seizing. My mom told me that the ambulance crew would not allow her to ride in the back with me, and they also told her that if I stopped breathing, they would have to pull over and intubate, which they did pull over and try to, but I was fighting them, so they saw that as a good sign and continued to the Mason City Hospital. Then, once we arrived at the hospital, they took me and tried to get me to stop seizing and put an IV in my shin because they thought I may have pulled it out if it were in my arm. Once I had stopped seizing and said I was stable and allowed for my family to see me, my dad told me that the doctors and nurses were amazed that after I'd had such a prolonged seizure that there were no signs of brain damage. And I realized that I say my mom and dad told me a lot, although this is all I have to go off of because I have no recollection of the time because I was very young and seizing. Also, for the next 2.5 years, I had the luxury of eating chocolate pudding every night before I went to bed. The reason for this was because the chocolate flavoring was the only thing my parents found to cover up the bitter taste of the drug, phenobarbital, which I had to take because of my seizures. And maybe this is why I'm not a huge fan of chocolate pudding to the day. Looking back on this, it makes me wonder if my life would have been different had I not seized when I was little. I could have been a completely different person, and we have no idea of that. In school, I may not be the brightest bulb in the bunch, but I do my absolute best and I am involved. Over my high school career, I've been involved in many different groups and clubs. I feel that having done so, I've changed as a person and grown. My freshman year was pretty scary, although I tried to do as much as possible. I was involved in basketball, track, softball, FFA club, FFA, math club, and my church's youth group, and I'm so grateful for the people who pushed me in athletics and academically. I may not be a star player or amazing at giving speeches for my FFA chapter, although I feel like I have gained a lot of knowledge from being involved in these groups. Competition, whether they were athletic or academic, I gained friends that have stuck with me all my high school career. They've pushed me to keep going and always chase my goals. My senior year, I believe it has been the most running around in circles I've done for a while, with trying to figure out how to prepare for college while taking college courses and staying on top of everything that I possibly can, whether that be scholarships or regular schoolwork. I could have been a completely different person if some of these things didn't happen to me in my head. Could I have been a completely different person if these things hadn't happened to me in my high school career? We really will never know because I am who I am after having done all these things. Our country has endured acts of terror that we are unable to stop or change. My odd medical history and my recent life experiences. Again, my name is Madison Ann Worshko. I was born on January 2nd, 2001, and my birth year brought many things to light. When thinking about tragic events that have happened in our country, stop and think of what our country has been like, what our country would have been like not having had those things happen. Would our world be different if they hadn't? Thank you.